We are live here to talk about the TV that we've been watching for the last 2 weeks. I am so excited that these two topics hit at the same time. You might say it's not an accident that we've waited to talk about season 5 of The Crown until at least at this point, at point of recording, the first half of the Harry and Meghan documentary has come out. I, of course, have Kate and Carey with me, and we had Kate and Carey a bit of what I'm going to call a dry spell with regards to news. Not that there wasn't a lot of news, we just weren't bringing a lot of news to the show. This week, we've had so much news that in my agenda, yes, I actually make an agenda, I know, there are actually 2 lines worth of news. Like it just continues and continues on this really old school notepad style agenda. So let's just dive right into it. What news have you guys been excited about in the last 2 weeks?
I kind of heard, well, I got to see the trailer for the new Daisy Jones and the Six. I think it's a show, yeah, through Prime. I had the
Amazon
date written
show,
down, but it's not
yeah.
pulling up. For when it comes out, that looks fantastic. Yes, it looks fantastic. I'm super excited to watch it. I probably will, I might even reread it again because it was one of my favorite books of the year when I read it, and so it was so great. So we're really looking forward to that one.
I'm literally so excited. I read Daisy Jones and the Six because Kate loaned me the book. I proceeded to keep the book for like a year because I take forever to actually like get through my reading list. But love, love, love. So excited about the series. Not excited about the fact that it's on Amazon, but somehow I'm gonna live through it. The trailer had like 3 seconds of content in it, and I was still like, oh, I'm gonna be insufferable about this for sure. So I can't wait to become my worst self when watching
Hmm.
that show. Carrie, I saw some news that I assume you've seen, and I am quite certain you'll be excited about. And that was some Superman and Lois teasers. We got 2 things in particular, maybe more than two, only these 2 stood out to me. One was our first look at the recasting of one of the Lost brothers. The other was a teaser that there's going to be a steamy love scene in the next episode in the premiere. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I was only aware of one of those things. That would be necessarily the photo that they've shared about the recasting. And if no one had said, "Hey, here's a photo of the recasting," I would have never freaking known because I was like, "Hey, that
Same.
looks just like that guy, right?" And
Right.
so, as far as casting, give whoever is in charge of casting an A and maybe bump their salary a little bit. So there you go. Um, the other part that you mentioned would be, it feels like it would be in keeping for what Superman and Lois is about because they are sort of the adult show. So
Mhm.
let's go all in on some adult moments and experiences, right? So, um, and who knows, it could be the last season. So empty all your bullets, right? Let's
Right.
go.
That's an appropriate metaphor for the topic. And I'm very excited. I think it'll be great. I think they're going to do it, they're going to do it justice. It'll be very sweet, but I think that's really fun. And it's in keeping with this idea that Superman and Lois is like kind of the main romance of the show. I know like the love of family is also in like a familial romantic sense, the love of the show, but I think that's really sweet. And I want that much more than I want any high schoolers who are actually 30-year-olds having some sort of awkward steamy scene after some cringy prom episode or whatever. So I'm thrilled. Not that it's all about me, but in this case, I feel like I might be pretty close to the target demo for the show as opposed to a lot of other CW shows. So maybe it could be a little about me. We also saw a lot of Golden Globe nominations and Emmy wins. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll just mention some things that stood out to me. Golden Globe nominations, we saw a lot for White Lotus. We saw some Only Murders in the Building ones, which I know we're all a fan of. We saw on the movie side, I've kind of been on my Anya Taylor Joy, the menu kick. So I was very pleased to see her get some nominations there. Emmy wins as well. There was some good. Abbott Elementary. got some nods throughout, both in terms of nominations and I think also in wins. I'd have to go back and check, but that's been kind of some buzzy stuff going over the last couple weeks. Do either of you track those or see any nominations that you cared about?
More than anything, I'm just usually happy when I see nominations of shows and people that I know. Right, that doesn't always happen. So I sort of feel like I'm part of the mainstream now. I don't know how to react to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're like, oh, I cared about this, and everybody else did too. Like when I
Yeah.
was watching White Lotus, which did you watch White Lotus?
Let me tell you a secret. I've never watched a second of White Lotus. However, I did watch sort of like the reactions and sort of the talking points and the explanations about what happened in the finale. And I've read some stories from Jennifer Coolidge, who was interviewed after the finale. So, no, I did not watch it, but I felt like I did.
You got all the good stuff without having
Yeah,
to go through the stress.
yeah. Makes you want
Yeah.
to go back and watch it now.
Well, it's fantastic, but much like a lot of, your HBO Max shows, or for me at least, I have to go in kind of bracing myself, knowing we're not going to get a lot of characters who are like, we're going to root for them because they're awesome. And we're not going to get a lot of like happy endings or justice or anything like that. But once you can brace yourself to that and be like, oh, this is a bunch of mostly awful people on a super rich vacation, you can just enjoy it for what it is. So that's been fantastic. Loved season 1. Season 2 was even better, but there was a character in season 2 who I really like just because like she's flawed. She's not necessarily a good person, but her flaws are ones that, I tend to root for in our fictional female characters. And I also happen to know her from, not know her personally, but know of her from another show called The Bold Type, which was like an ABC free, like she had mostly done like, I guess like the soap opera circuit and like ABC freeform, whatever type of stuff. She hadn't done like big, like an HBO Max epic show or anything like this. So I was like, oh, I know who she is. Like, this is a big step up to be in like something like this with like Jennifer Coolidge and, Theo James and all that kind of stuff. And I felt like kind of like, oh, I like the character nobody else knows about. She became everybody's favorite. Everybody's favorite. I was not at all in a cool minority. Everybody loved her in this.
So is she one of the? And here's my naivete, right, or my ignorance. Was she one of the characters? Because I think there were two like pairings of people, and the whole situation was about like cheating and the
Yeah.
impacts and effect of that. I'm assuming she's one of those pairs of relationships, right?
She was, yes, she was. Of all of the cheaters in that mix, she was the least cheater or the last to cheat, but there's no actual proof, spoilers in the show, that anybody except one of them actually does cheat. And it's kind of this like, they might actually have an open relationship, so I'm not even sure if that counts, but like, what do I know? So there's some nuance there, but she's like the least bad of the bunch, if that makes sense. Also, you might see Kate popping on and off screen. I'm not sure. She's frozen, technical issues. I'm seeing some pop-ups and downs over here on the side. So we're gonna try to figure that out and make it work. I will begrudgingly take frozen Kate off the screen right now and hope that unfrozen Kate returns to us. Well, as we're doing that, Carey, the last thing that I had on the list is just a note that Taylor Swift is directing a movie. That's all. What do you
What?
say? You looked very questioning about that.
No,
Had you not
yeah.
heard that news?
Here's the deal, right? Because it's funny because sometimes you don't know what's real news, what might be sponsored for something, or what just might be totally made up. I thought I saw that somewhere, but I never followed it up to see exactly what it was and what it was about. So tell me, like
Yeah,
a movie?
I think it's like a short form movie. It might be like for submission to film festival type of vibe. I'm not totally sure, but yeah, she's supposed to be. And there's some other director or creative big name Guillermo del Toro or something like that, who's like associated with the project, where it's like it's going to be a legit. Not that she would do anything less than legitimate, but yeah, I think it's supposed
Well,
to be like a romantic drama, which sounds right.
I look at it like this, right? And I know it's sort of on a small scale, but you direct videos and you put together albums that requires a vision, and it requires an ability to have people do what it is that you need them to do.
Hmm.
That's one end of it. And then you put together like these concerts, these tours, and that sort of thing. Again,
Which is a
requires you.
huge
Yeah,
production, and taking it
yeah,
on the road, you know.
yeah. So I guess the director is a fancy way of saying the person in charge to make sure that this vision gets executed.
Right.
So in that respect, she's got experience doing that. Now the question is, can she translate that to make like for a very good visual experience? I guess we're gonna find out.
Based on the 10-minute music video she made for All Too Well, I'm guessing yes, and it sounds like, you know, we've already got some big-ish names who are super willing to get involved in a Taylor Swift production, having a Stranger Things and a Teen Wolf, you know, former cat, well, I guess current Stranger Things, former Teen Wolf lead pulled into just a music video project's a good sign that there'll probably be some big names willing to attach themselves to this, or good actors willing to attach themselves to this.
But to be fair, as it relates to direction, which is about decisions, she also decided to be in like Cats. So
That's
strike there.
That's a really good point. I think I blocked that from my memory, but at one point I did accidentally walk into a Cats showing at a movie theater, and it was
Holy crap!
horrific. I walked right back out.
Uh, yeah. I think it would be not to get off topic, but I think if you took that approach and made it like either a parody or a horror film, it might actually work. As a straightforward musical, not so much.
Yeah, I feel like there's so like I have such an open mind when it comes to musicals. A musical can be really bad and I'll still like it. Bad in a couple ways. It can be a bad story that like, you know, for example, some of the Rogers and Hammerstein type of stories, they're not actually that good, or they're kind of questionable in hindsight. You know, something like Oklahoma that just has like themes that I don't particularly care for. They can be low quality, like think like high school, college productions of things, which, you know, sometimes they're okay, but most of the time, you know, I'll still buy into the magic and wonder. I'll suspend disbelief because I love music theater. So I think there's a way to do it. That as a blockbuster movie was not the way to do it. I'm sure we're like kind of all on the same page, but I think that there is a way you can kind of honor the themes and transform them to be appropriate for a movie medium. It just would have needed a lot more transformation from like this literal take on it that they did. I think they tried to go too close to what an onstage production of it would look like.
And they were cats, and so yeah, it was just problematic. But
There
fingers
are
crossed, she does well.
there are two good, really good, in my opinion, movie adaptations of a musical that I think were perfect for the time and hold up pretty well over time. One is Julie Andrews in A Sound of Music with Christopher Plummer. That is incredible. It was transformed exactly the right amount to like still be interesting as a movie and also honor some of the stage aspects of it. The other is the Emmy Rossum Phantom of the Opera from I think like 2003 or something like that. Stormy in the chat says hi. Hi, Stormy. We just got done talking about the news and we are about to dive into what we watched this week. Now, since it seems like Kate's still having some technical issues joining, let's start with what we watched this week and then we'll end with our The Crown versus Harry and Meghan discussion. And Stormy or anybody else watching in the chat, if you have thoughts about the latest season of The Crown and or the first installment of Harry and Meghan, the second installment comes tonight at like 3 a.m. my time. Let us know because it was wild, let me tell you, to watch the two back to back. But before we get into that, I'm current on Stargirl. You're current on Stargirl. That season just wrapped up. Let's talk about Stargirl thoughts.
Well, all right. So I'm trying to think. The last time we talked So the last two episodes, I'll just sort of like put them together. The penultimate episode, which I think is a really great word, penultimate sounds fantastic, right? Fantastic episode. I thought I gave it like a 9.9, right? Would have given it higher, but this is the kind of storytelling that they should have been doing like 3 or 4 or 5 episodes ago. That's the only reason I marked it down, right? So I thought that was fantastic. The revelation that they had, no spoilers here, but I don't care. The revelation was like groundbreaking. It's the kind of revelations and twists that like Superman and Lois are really, really good at. And so I really like that. I kind of sort of had issues with the finale and understanding that they had to wrap up the series probably at a time when they weren't expecting or at least not hoping to. It always makes me go back to think about what is the purpose of the show? What is the journey of the title character, right? I always think about that when I think about a series finale. And honestly, and again, it's sort of like a combination of the fact that they had to end soon, and but I think it's also has to do with writing to a great degree. I don't still know that I had a full grasp on what Courtney's journey was, or should have been, right? Um, it wasn't always clear. It didn't feel like the show revolved around her and what it is that she either wanted to do, wanted to learn, or whatever the case may be. And that's sort of what happens when you have an ensemble cast, right? I mean, they just want to give everyone an opportunity. And what generally happens is that you end up not giving anyone the appropriate narrative that they need. Um, and so, not to get too into the weeds about all of that, but I just think the show is called Stargirl. Um, she she was incredibly well cast for that role. She did a good job, but I just think that I wish that there had been more time to flesh out her journey. So you felt like the show was her voice, and I didn't always feel like the show was her voice, and that's sort of what I'm disappointed about. And I don't know whose fault that is, but that's sort of what it left me with when it ended.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think what was interesting to me is I caught up on Stargirl and then, watched the finale, of course, since we last talked, pretty shortly after I watched Enola Holmes. Now, we shouldn't be comparing two vastly different pieces of media, but I'm about to do so. What I think the latest season, particularly of Stargirl versus Enola Holmes, both seasons, is we have this main character and she does have a particular perspective and it is limited, and it's okay to acknowledge that limitation, from the creative lens, saying, this is a teen girl and she has a particular perspective. With Enola Holmes, they acknowledge things with her class and race and privilege, where she's going to have kind of a limited view on things, where you're going to need to bring in some side characters to really, illuminate that and be the hero within that moment of their own story, and not just have this sort of detached savior figure. And I get the sense that they're really trying to do that in Stargirl season 2, bring in other perspectives so that the limitations of one particular person, of one particular identity based on her age as a teen, her gender as a woman, her race as a white woman, particularly where she is and her privilege and the type of home life, that we can sort of expand her point of view by everybody else that's there. And I get that, but what they lose in Stargirl that they didn't lose in Enola is that she is still there and she is still on the journey. And in acknowledging the limitations in Enola Holmes and showing, the world through her lens and with others around, we get this broad picture of what we as the audience, what she's seeing and what she's not seeing. Whereas in Stargirl, we kind of just shift her to the side entirely and we bring in other people, but we're losing how she's seeing those people. We're focusing on all of these other stories in very limited screen time. We're focusing on all these other stories, and they may be great stories, but we're losing this big picture perspective of how does this fit within the Stargirl growth trajectory? How is she seeing them? How is Courtney interacting with their stories?
Yeah. And again, a lot of that has to do with the sort of truncated expectations of what the season was going to be when you find out sort of halfway through that it's going to be the very last, because there were 2 whole episodes to essentially set up either a storyline in the next season or perhaps a spinoff that didn't do anything to feed the narrative this for her story and for this show. And that's really disappointing when you see how good things could have been based on the penultimate episode. It's like, again, like I said, that should have happened like episode 4, episode 5, and then you sort of build off of that. Um, I don't know. I guess the hope is that she's supposed to be doing a guest spot on Titans, the
Yep.
HBO Max show,
Which
and
is a good
so
fit.
yeah, and so I don't know how much of that will be an opportunity to sort of expand on her narrative or see if it fits, and to see if they can bring something of what their show was down the line to say, hey, HBO Max, see how popular and successful this was. Can we continue somehow? So yeah, beyond that, I just have a bunch of nitpicky issues with sort of the plot and the plan, but I don't know if I want to get into all of it here and just bore folks. Grand scheme of things, I thought this season was just okay. I think season 1 was the best work that they've done, primarily because of the villains that they had, and that obviously meant what she had to overcome. I like the genre of the second season, which was a horror season,
Yes.
I like that change. And I liked what they presented this third season to be, sort of like a murder mystery. They just never executed it. It got to a point where it's like no one even cared anymore who perpetrated this murder, or it was no longer driving the narrative. It was just there.
Which felt intentional. It felt like we got to the point where they're like, who committed the murder is not the point. The bigger murder was the friends we made along the way. Like, it was like they're trying to back up to a bigger picture, but you hadn't established plot at that point in a way that the viewer cares deeply about. And you've established characters that I think we do care about and we want to care about, both our lead and our side characters, but their stories weren't moving forward in a consistent way where we could get invested in a specific outcome. Whether it be, you've got the friendship plots, the romantic plots, her relationship with the various father figures in her life, their relationships with each other. Like there was certainly the element of biting off more than they could chew, but also it not tying back to her growth. Exactly. There's a question Stormy put in the chat that I think kind of ties into this, but it's part of the broader picture of DC shows. She says, I'm wondering what you all think James Gunn will do with the DC shows. What could it mean for the few CW shows still on, like Superman and Lois?
My personal thought and expectation is that they're going to clear the decks, because going back to the decision they made as it relates to Wonder Woman, right? And it was like, well, did they decide not to go forward with it because they just didn't like the story, the script, or whatever it might be? I think what they're waiting on is to see what happens with this Flash movie, and then they're going to say, okay, well, what worked well? What can we take from this?
Not
And
much from the Flash
well,
movie.
well, and that may be the case. So either they're going to do that, or quite honestly, it just feels like, because people keep referring to like the DCEU, and I'm like, what does that even mean anymore? Because I mean, that's basically the Snyder movies, and he's not part of it anymore. So I think they're going to wipe the deck clean. I think Superman and Lois might, if they're lucky, they might get another season. I've heard someone say that it might go to Amazon Prime or something like that. But I think, unfortunately, I think that show's done. Obviously, the Flash is going away. Um, and so, what else do we really have? I personally don't think, and I hate to say this out loud, but I don't think that David Ramsey's show is ever going to see the light of day. I just think too much time has passed.
I think
Um,
that's true, but it does hurt to hear.
yeah, yeah. I just feel like what they're going to do with DC is they're going to pretty much scrap anything that had any sort of affiliation with what we refer to as the Arrowverse. I think that's going to go away. Um, I, I even heard that, and of course, you know how this goes, but I've heard that they want to bring Matt Reeves's Batman with Robert
Mhm.
Pattinson. I think they want to lean into that. I think a really good idea, even though they're talking about Joker 2 being sort of a musical, or I don't know. But my point is, if you take the Joker and you take Batman, what they've done with that, if you decide to build off of those two things, I think you may very well have something that they can work with. It's to be honest, I know I'm probably rambling a bit because basically the people in DC are probably um, rambling as well. I just don't know, and I don't know that anyone knows what they're going to do with it. And it's unfortunate as a fan base because it's like when you tell people that you're a fan of DC properties now, they look at you with sort of a look of really, why
Mhm.
would you do that to yourself? And it's only so much of that we could take, right?
Right. I think the focus on fans is kind of this overarching thing that becomes a point of contention. And Stormy brings this up in the chat. She references HBO shows getting canceled, pulled off the network. She says it seems like the head of that company doesn't care about the fans or those who work on these shows and movies. And that is a good point with regard to how this relates to fans and what they want to retain access to, what they want to be able to rewatch, what they want to be able to consume or own, or at least know that it will exist in perpetuity, as that sort of a way of honoring the art, even if it's something that went straight to streaming or only got one season or whatever the case may be. There's that aspect, and the retention of art and the access to art is kind of that broader conversation there that obviously I think becomes just a money discussion. What's going to make money? What owner, paying out royalties versus taking something off the air? It's just going to come down to the money. When it comes to, she also references Wonder Woman not getting her third movie. I think I blocked that news out of my memory because I left that out of our news entirely. It becomes more than just a lack of focus on fans. It becomes a what kind of art gets prioritized, what kind of art gets a chance after a perceived flop. I understand Wonder Woman 2 was perceived as a flop. I get that. I didn't necessarily perceive it that way, but I agree with the criticisms entirely. But in a trilogy with a big name like that, if you're perceiving it as a big name and you're perceiving the artistic value behind it, dropping that becomes this broader indication of your values. And I think I said Wonder Woman and Kate magically appeared. So hopefully she can hear us now. Kate, we're discussing, we're wrapping up our discussion on Stargirl and kind of got into the broader
Mhm.
state of the DCEU, whatever that is. And Stormy had
Yeah,
referenced what are our thoughts on the trajectory of the DC universe, given some of the changes that have been made.
yeah, I've actually been able to hear the entire conversation. You just couldn't see me, so I don't know what that was about.
That's kind of cool. A little bit of a flex.
Yeah, a little bit of flex. Uh, uh, yeah, I haven't really been keeping up too terribly much with the state of the DC kind of movies or anything like that, so I don't really have any strong opinions on it, other than I know it's kind of a mess, and I don't understand why the Flash movie ended up being made, but that's
Truly.
a whole truly. Other than that, I don't really have any kind of thoughts on the future or big feelings or theories about what's going on right now, because it just really hasn't been on my radar.
Which kind of says something about the state of it. The if if we were to speak of some of the key things in play for Marvel right now, which I hate, even bringing that into the discussion, there would at least be something we have a passionate opinion for or against. And for DC, it's like, well, if you don't have any interest in making the third Wonder Woman movie in what clearly should have been a trilogy, then I'm not sure but you are interested in putting out the Flash movie that's so riddled with both controversy and disinterest. Was there that much interest for a Flash movie? Be for real? Like, there's a difference in artistic values that we're attaching to things. But let's dabble in some more controversy with what little time we have left. Let's just get a baseline here. Have you watched the latest season of The Crown, and or are you abreast of British history? And have you watched the first half of the Harry and Meghan documentary, and or are you abreast of Harry and Meghan's journey in the last few years?
I have seen all of The Crown, and I am relatively informed on recent British history. I have not watched the documentary. I don't think I will. I'm not morally opposed to it or anything. I just have very little interest in watching it.
Fair enough.
My role will be the uninformed heckler of like, why did they do that? So that will be my role. I'm familiar with like Harry and Meghan, but I did not watch the documentary. So I will be sort of interested to see, or at least hear, I guess, what the dirty stuff is that they talked about in here.
Absolutely. Well, just to round out everybody's perspective, we also have Stormy in the chat who says, of course, she watched both. Team Harry and Meghan always abolish the monarchy. That family is horrible. So we've got all sides represented. I am on Stormy's side, so maybe we have a side doubly represented. Down with the monarchy and love Harry and Meghan. But let's just touch on it a bit. And I want to start with The Crown because they, have existed longer, and certainly longer than they should have. And I want to get your thoughts on kind of a cognitive dissonance I had when watching season 5. And in particular, this occurred in episode 5, which is Prince Charles centric. So Prince Charles, who recently IRL became king, I guess. In this episode, he is going through a divorce, cheating on his wife, being disrespectful to the queen. Not that we need to respect a queen, because at one point some member of her family decided that everybody in their lineage was better than everybody else and should conquer the earth, but like just being disrespectful to his mother, we'll put it that way. And he is essentially like a man having a midlife crisis, but being like particularly annoying about it. And such was the case in real life. But in real life, you can add a bunch of other things that the show doesn't always get into and acknowledge, like he's racist and sexist and all of the ists that are likely associated with anybody in the royal family. But we get through this episode and they do everything in their power to humanize him. Everything in their power. And up until this point, you'll recall, Kate, when we last sat on here and talked, I'd only watched like 3 episodes or something of the latest season. Mm-hmm. And I was like, something about the season isn't sitting right with me. The casting of Elizabeth as Princess Diana feels like an insult to Princess Diana. I love Elizabeth, but her portrayal and the way she kind of brings her about, she comes across as kind of melodramatic, unlikable, selfish, self-obsessed, not a good mother. Just like a lot of stuff about the way they portrayed Diana was like, oh my goodness, what do you have against her? Well, the entire season culminating in episode 5, which is the halfway point, I start to realize is just monarch propaganda. And then I had to sit with this cognitive dissonance where the monarch propaganda is coming through to me because I don't like Charles. But I realized at this point, I have watched 4 seasons of this show and have been apparently perfectly fine and blind to the monarch propaganda because I was willing to accept this humanization of somebody like Elizabeth. And they also kind of have some flashbacks to like her, Queen Victoria and her. They have some present day, presence of her sister. There's a lot of women in leadership in the show, and they're not good, but I'm willing to accept the humanization of people doing objectively bad things because they were women. And it wasn't until it was Charles that they were spinning their propaganda around that I was like, whoa, 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 no monarch propaganda. So now I'm having to deal with this, and I want to know if you went through the same identity crisis.
So, I mean, we briefly talked about this also offline. I have a slightly different perspective on it, but I do see where you're coming from. To me, I think they've always been on the let's humanize every single character as much as we possibly can track, which I appreciate. I like that they have made Elizabeth, especially, like, she presents as the calm, never revealing, doesn't show her opinion at all monarch, but then behind the scenes she has a bit of the fierce streak when it comes to kind of managing those around her. I do think that it adds something to the story and to the retelling of people in doing that, and I also think that it uses this medium better by doing that, in the sense of, like, they're using the royal family to tell stories about real people. Mm-hmm. That it's not always accurate, but they're representing complex creatures interacting, dealing with these pressures, and existing in human experiences through the characters of the royal family. This season, there was a shift in that, and it was hard to place, because where they've previously humanized Charles, and I didn't always like him, but I didn't hate him. This time, they took away all of his negative qualities in a way that only left him just as petulant and just as egocentric as before, but they only shed the light onto him to be the victim. So the story around him always made him the victim, even if he was still acting very egocentric, petulant, just whiny. Mm-hmm. That was a bit of a shift, and I think it feeds into kind of the whole problem in the story at large, is what made all of their characters so much more understandable and realistic and empathetic. Previously was the ability to also include external commentary within the story. So we always had a better understanding of the worldview at large within the story. We had a better understanding of how the House of Lords and House of Commons felt about them. We knew how the Prime Minister felt. In this season, we didn't really get to see terribly much about how the world saw them, and we didn't get to see terribly much about how the council members saw them or the Prime Minister. The only thing we got to see was the Prime Minister being the best character in the entire show. That's all we got to see. We didn't really get to see him stand up for them outside of it. We just got to see him be very good and conscious of the world around him. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of took away this level of, you have reason to care for them, because you get to see the implications of their actions. The choices that they make feel more weighty because you see the recourse, like the reverberations of their poor actions. And instead, this season, all we got to see was all the oppression that Charles gets because of a couple of instances. And
I like that you use the term like oppression in air quotes, because he does believe himself to be oppressed by his circumstance. And it's such a perfect example of when you're used to privilege anything less than that feels like oppression. He is obviously extremely privileged, living an extremely high life where he gets to get away with being a terrible person on the taxpayer's dollar. But because he was raised to believe that he should be king, the second he wants to be king, he can't be king, and he can't make king decisions, whatever the things that the monarch okays or doesn't okay, the partnerships they do or don't do, because he can't be king. The second he wants to be king, he feels oppressed, despite the fact that he can't be king because of an existing system that so benefits him that he, anyways, you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
But that kind of came to a peak in episode 5. Mike, I'm wondering, as you mentioned, they try to humanize everybody. Bishop's trying to climb on the keyboard. They try to humanize everybody. Did you feel like that applied to Diana as well? Because Stormy says in the chat, and I agree, that the way they portrayed Diana wasn't okay. They wrote her as vain, selfish, didn't have a good relationship with her children, was not necessarily a good mom, borderline creepy the way they wrote her with her kids. What did you think of her portrayal?
It's not totally opposite of your opinion, but I will say I have read many of a bit about. It's not. But I have read many a biography about the family. I know a great deal about them based on possibly skewed opinions of biographers. You never know truly what you're reading. The weird relationship she had with her sons is verified in many locations. I can't give you sources at the moment, but it is well documented that there is a bit of a history of that weird relationship with her sons. What got me, though, was actually it's also well documented that she didn't hate the monarchy into the same degree as which it was shown in the story, in the show. She didn't hate them like that. I don't think it was Elizabeth's portrayal of her per se, because I do think she was actually one of the better actors in carrying out the portrayal previously established. I don't think Charles was able to continue from Colin's interpretation of Charles to the new interpretation. It didn't feel seamless. Same with Philip, same with Elizabeth. Whereas previous iterations from the first cast to the second cast, it felt seamless. Second cast to third cast did not. I think Elizabeth Debicki as Diana was one of the few people that did a better job of making that transition. What I will agree with you on, though, is they hyper-fixated on her horror qualities, and they did need to explore some of these, I think, obsessive personality traits with her, some of the things that she did that could be considered quite reckless, counterproductive for her own goals, all that stuff. But in doing that, they're kind of relying on the built-in sympathy you have as a viewer, with this expectation that because you're watching, you know about who Diana was, and what happened to her, and you're already coming in with a great deal of sympathy for her, which you do, but you can't rely on that for storytelling. And I think they did that across the board with so many other things, with the context of history, with the public opinion, with all these other things, that instead, so they could focus more on the interpersonal interactions, thinking that that would deeply enrich the humanization that they were going for. But you lost the context that you had in previous seasons. You lost this is how we're interpreting the information setup that they would give you, because you were kind of just thrown to the wolves of understanding what in history was happening for 90% of the show in season 5, and it had the negative adverse effect of making everybody less sympathetic, even though you got to spend more time with each character having interpersonal interactions.
I think it made characters less sympathetic to not know some of the historical context. But on the flip side, some of the historical context makes them look pretty bad. Where I struggled is that same thing is true, that the historical context should make them look pretty bad. That same thing is true for seasons 1 through 4. Arguably worse during those time periods based on the stories they're borrowing from and the implied historical things that are happening at the time, that they either had to taper off. We see them releasing a colony at the end of the show. The Commonwealth, air quotes, is shrinking. You see them, at the end of episode 5, where I was gagging at this portrayal of like Charles decided to help underprivileged youth and give, a bunch of money to them first, and then they show him like breakdancing with a bunch of like non-white teens. I wanted to shoot my screen. First of all, you're obviously using them as a PR prop then, and you're using them again as a PR prop now, because I'm fully convinced that this is just monarch propaganda created by Peter Morgan. Number 2, he's not giving anybody any money. That's taxpayer dollars. This is a monarchy, but that doesn't erase how governments work. They have no money of their own. If they wanted some, they'd have to get a job. Anyways, Carey's reaction to this is definitely adding some soothing to the wounds, where I feel like maybe my frustration isn't alone.
So can I ask you a question, right?
Yes.
So if you had to say, and purpose is not the right word, but if someone were to ask you, what do you think sort of the goal of the people who bring this show? I mean, what is it? What story, I guess, are they trying to tell? Are they trying to make people sympathetic with the monarchy and say, hey, they're regular people too and they're a bunch of screw-ups? Or I'm just interested to get a feel for what you feel like is sort of like the story or the message that the folks are trying to send through the show.
My feelings are biased, but I can tell you what they've said, which is, I guess Peter Morgan and the creative team have said this is like a love letter to Queen Elizabeth. Which, when I watched seasons 1 through 4, I was like, oh, how lovely. Isn't that sweet? We love a matriarchy. She's doing so well. And I just like, it's not that I didn't see the atrocities that the British monarchy enacted at the time. And it wasn't like, oh, I'm just willing to overlook it. It just didn't register as propaganda. I'm like, okay, we tell stories about flawed people. And that's a great thing. Like, I'm happy to hear stories about flawed people. It wasn't until I saw the spin that was taken on Charles, where it's like, this is a real life person, and painting him in a positive life has real life implications. Painting the current king of the, Commonwealth in this kind of positive light, and using, whatever measly supposed good he did for like youth in the countries that he's oppressed, whatever. And I guess breakdancing with teens in the 90s. Wow, whatever. You're so cool. Do you feel cool? Would you like to buy a Corvette? Like, I don't know. Like that kind of using that, I feel like has like real life implications. And I just didn't register it till then. But putting Elizabeth on a pedestal, on a throne, if you will, also has real life implications. So I should have been registering that in season 1 through 4, and I didn't. So that's what I'm confronted with, especially watching this in conjunction with Harry and Meghan. And I know neither of you watched it, which is perfectly fine, but it really stands out because one of the main themes in season 5 was this interview, a bunch of interviews. They're all just doing interviews. The royal family and the press are just handshake emoji always, or like fighting emoji always, but like kind of like this toxic, never ending relationship. We see the interviews that Diana did or was manipulated into doing, whatever the case may be. And that's like a huge plot point leading up to the end of the series. And in the Harry and Meghan thing that they did with Netflix, they're sort of trying to deconstruct some of their own work. So they're one of the big things that they do in one of a whole episode of like the 4 is they're talking about essentially the engagement press that they had to do, the big sit down interview that they did in I think it was in Buckingham Palace after the photo shoot on the lawn, where they had to, spout off, oh, everybody's been nice, everybody's been so welcoming, this is all so great, and they had all these points, and they take that and they're like, this was scripted, this was a reality show, here was what actually happened, and here, so they're kind of trying to undo past bad narratives that they themselves have put out to the press willingly. So that's been really interesting. And also diving back into their childhood and both of their unique relationship to the media as children. We see paparazzi hounding Harry when he was quite young, and his own family selling photo shoots with him while skiing, and parents okaying this because that's just par for the course, because the taxpayers feel they have a right to him. We see Meghan's relationship with the media, where she, when she was quite young, as part of a school project, wrote in about like a Dove commercial or whatever that she felt was like sexist, because they basically said like only women do dishes or something like that, and she got them to change. It was very cute. So there's just these interesting stories where they talk about their good and bad relationships with the media that just came in very interesting contrast to the relationship with the media as portrayed in season 5 of The Crown, which may or may not be exactly true of the royal family's relationship with the media, certainly.
It sounds like a crossover needs to happen. Make it happen.
I don't think that they are going to continue The Crown, but I'll go on the record. I don't know if they've already said this, so I don't know if I'm immediately right or wrong. I don't think they're going to continue The Crown to the Harry and Meghan days. I think they're going to end it before then, because from what I've seen in season 5 of their perspective, they only care about the Crown lineage, and they'll get rid of the spare, as it were, from the storyline as fast as possible. I don't think they want to bring Meghan into this. I think they are above that. As it were. Kate, what are your thoughts on that? I know they've already cast young Kate.
Yeah, I've already kind of previously said this. I would not be surprised if the finale is the Kate William wedding. To kind of go back and answer my kind of perspective of the question that Carey asked real quick, what the point was. I think in the first 4 seasons, the point of the story, whether they were saying this publicly or not, was to tell a story of a woman dealing with conflicting and complex family issues of work and family. And if we didn't always agree with her morally, that's a whole different conversation. But it was an interesting way of, like, you were always sympathetic of, she felt like duty bound to choose this, but she always wanted to choose this for her family, but because she is responsible for all these things, she always had to choose duty, and balancing that, and you had to grow sympathetic to her with that, even if you didn't always morally agree with the choices that the monarchy was kind of doing. This past season, they doled out Queen Catherine so much. They made her this very docile, almost kind of moping, sad woman who has very little control of her own situation and own life, and not in the previous situation of a rock and hard place, but more of just like everybody was just shielding her from hard information to hear, and she was made to be this little puppet in somebody else's story, which had previously always been her own. And instead of making Charles sympathetic of having to deal with similar family versus duty responsibilities, because that's never been his style, he's always chosen his own pleasure, his own preference over duty. He's never shown to have that same struggle, and I do think that's part of the reason why there's this dissonance now between the first 4 seasons and this, is you could at least understand she really didn't want to pick the choice she made, that she had this struggle within her, and that she ultimately had to, because she thought that was the best thing for her duty. He was just whining. He's just sad and mopey and whiny and wants what he wants, and is not willing to try to fulfill the responsibility in which he's been cast in this birth, and has made the monarchy and his own family and personal life worse because of this.
So it sounds like he's the Oliver Queen that never went to the island, or the Bruce Wayne that never lost his
Yes.
parents on steroids. And those are like annoying characters, right? We never watch a show about them. So yeah, I get that, right?
That's really well put, Kate. I think that your summary of Charles is how I see him, and yet I had a struggle while watching the season, while where I felt like this is how I see him, but I feel like whoever created this sees him differently. I didn't struggle with them humanizing Camilla. I felt that that was
No.
appropriate, and I like the humanization of women that are globally seen as villains for whatever reason, for being loved by the wrong person, for being the other woman, whatever the case may be. I didn't mind that per se. I you know I don't think she's a particularly upstanding character in the story either, but in contrast to Charles, she's a saint. In the chat, Stormy points out, I loved Harry standing up for his mom. She's referencing the Harry and Meghan documentary, where Harry really stands up for everything that Diana went through and what made her kind of do some of the things she did, particularly in relation to the media, as their documentary has to do with this kind of toxic relationship between the royal family and the media. And they touch on Diana's relationship with the media and what attempts she did try to make to protect her kids from them, and also what sacrifices she made where she went with the flow and did not protect her kids and let them be, paparazzi'd constantly on family vacations, and then unfortunately times when she couldn't protect them, like when they had to do meet and greets after her funeral, or what, they had to like walk the receiving line and then like walk behind the gate, just horrific, real life stuff that they had to do, which I don't know how the show's going to handle that. But she says also, it's a shame William is towing that monarchy line, even though that means silencing his mother. Ooh. Yeah, it seems like there is not much love lost between the two brothers presently, which is interesting for the future of the monarchy with this whole heir and a spare thing. When, historically problems arise when somebody who is in the direct line to the throne does not get along with the person who is directly after them in line to the throne. History would say something bad's going to happen. Can't say what, but who knows? Anyways, just a thought.
Keep a check on those brake lines, will you?
Yeah, maybe if we dismantled the entire monarchy, everybody involved in the royal family would have a better chance of living a long, happy life. I'll put it that way. Just a thought. Do what you want, though. We are at time, so I have to cut this off, even though, as Stormy said earlier, I could talk about this all day. I also could, Stormy, and I suspect Kate could as well. Carey might be sick of this, but
I can listen to it though.
the rest of us could. But unfortunately, we have to cut it off. We may revisit this a bit once we've had a chance to digest and return in the new year to talk about who knows what, definitely Glass Onion, because I'm watching that between now and then, and the second half of Harry and Meghan, so we can dive more into the royal, theories and conspiracies, and we can talk about what we read over Christmas break. Very excited.
That'll be a long list.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Well, Kate and Carey, I will talk to you both between now and January 4th when we return. But have a wonderful holiday, and I will see you on the other side. Bye.
Bye.